The 43rd of 53 children, Osama bin Laden was the catalyst of the fundamentalist Mujahideen resistance movement. As the Soviet Union penetrated further into Afghanistan, bin Laden preached about the necessity to liberate the country of so-called infidels. Abdullah Azzam would become bin Laden's first mentor, who would inspire him to move full-time from Saudi Arabia to Afghanistan. In this transition, he would bring equipment to contribute to the Mujahideen's campaign against the Soviets, helping create camps that would protect al-Qaeda from attacks. One of the most famous camps whose creation bin Laden was directly involved in was that of Tora Bora. Bin Laden would stimulate sentiment for increased Mujahideen action through his encouragement for thousands of Saudis to volunteer for his jihad mission. Willing to sacrifice comfort and his life to fight for the ratification of Soviet presence, bin Laden appeared as an inspirational leader and hero on numerous Arab magazines and newspapers in the Gulf region. The Soviet presence furthermore brought upon the opposition of imams at mosques, who were encouraged to deliver fiery sermons to promote a united uprising, the Mujahideen. By 1986, bin Laden had set up his own training camps in various parts of Afghanistan. He was in shock when he heard that the Saudi government had made the decision to invite U.S. troops to defend the kingdom and liberate Kuwait, as this was an intrusion into the holy places. His fear was that this scenario would be a replication of the Soviet Union's occupation of Afghanistan. Bin Laden decided that the most plausible solution would be to take up arms in order to confront the U.S. troops on the Arabian Peninsula. Al-Qaeda's leader would take up arms in the form of two attacks. The first was a bombing of U.S. soldiers in transit at the Golden War Hotel in Yemen, killing 3 people and wounding 5. In 1993, 2 Black Hawk helicopters were brought down in attacks in Mogadishu. This war was the beginning of a series of actions that would culminate in the War on Terror in Afghanistan. At first, bin Laden began to concentrate on building an organization to assail U.S. military, administrative, and business targets. The country of Sudan, of which bin Laden inhabited in the early 1990s, tried to depose bin Laden because they felt he was becoming increasingly dangerous. This proved to be correct, as bin Laden would make a precipitous declaration of jihad due to American occupation of the land in the sacred places. In this period, al-Qaeda would acquiesce with Taliban in the decision to take definitive action against the U.S. In 1998, bin Laden announced the formation of a World Islamic Front for Jihad that declared al-Qaeda's abhorrence of Jews and Crusaders. 2 bombings of American embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam using trucks riddled with explosives were the first attacks by the World Islamic Front. The U.S. responded with a counterattack of its own, attacking certain al-Qaeda strongholds but failing to kill bin Laden. This bombardment aroused a message from bin Laden that al-Qaeda would avenge this attack in a spectacular way and would deal a blow to America that would shake it to its very foundations, a blow it had never experienced before. On September 11, 2001, Americans would witness this threat firsthand by means of the attacks on the World Trade Centers and the Pentagon. This catastrophic September 11th attack would only heighten his image as a charismatic leader capable of leading the rapidly growing terrorist organization of al-Qaeda. His hatred for the U.S. spawned from a precedent the Soviet Union set as an oppressive regime that the Afghanistan people despised. Bin Laden manipulated the situation and gave voice to the feelings of frustration, alienation, and neglect that Afghanistan as a nation felt. In the wake of the September 11th attacks, President Bush pressured the Taliban government of Afghanistan to turn over Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda leaders. When the Taliban demanded proof of bin Laden's connection to terrorist attacks, the U.S. refused.
Our war on terror begins with al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
In October 2001, U.S. forces invaded Afghanistan to take out the Taliban regime, officially launching the War on Terror. The war began with British and U.S. forces joining to launch airstrike campaigns over enemy targets. The capital city of Afghanistan, Kabul, fell on November 13th. The war raged on with no easing of tensions until May 2, 2011, shortly after 1 a.m. local time, when Osama bin Laden was killed by a United States Special Forces military unit.
Yet his death does not mark the end of our effort. There is no doubt that al-Qaeda will continue to pursue attacks against us. We must, and we will, remain vigilant at home and abroad.
As described in a 1974 National Security Agency profile of Leonid Brezhnev, the Soviet leader had reportedly suffered 2 heart attacks and possibly a stroke. According to Stefan Kotkin, author of Armageddon Averted, The Soviet Collapse, Brezhnev suffered a major stroke in January 1976 that rendered him clinically dead. Although he was revived, his health continued to be in major jeopardy, and talks of Brezhnev retiring were arising in 1976. Yuri Andropov succeeded Leonid Brezhnev in 1982, after Brezhnev suffered yet another stroke, this time claiming his life. Andropov's policies were a stark contrast from those of the politically radical Brezhnev. In Andropov's short time in office, he removed some of the old elites from their positions in the Soviet Politburo, the same elites that pushed the decision for the USSR to invade Afghanistan in 1979. What if Brezhnev had failed to be revived from the 1976 stroke that left him clinically dead? If Brezhnev had died from this stroke, Andropov would be his likely successor. He would replace the same Politburo elites as he did in 1983, with less radical politicians, drastically changing the decision-making process for the invasion into Afghanistan.